Okay, well, we might get started then. Welcome everyone to the Spray or Not to Spray, the Value of SclerotiniaCM webinar. My name's Jeanette Pratt. I'm from DPIRD in Moore, so I'm going to be your host today. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Ciara now, to Ciara Beards from DPIRD in Geraldton to start us off. Thanks, Ciara.
Thank you for joining us all today. I'm going to be speaking about the SclerotiniaCM app. And the SclerotiniaCM app, it stands for Sclerotinia Canola Management. So the app has been created by these projects that you can see here on the screen. They are national projects, and the app's been created from research across Australia. It has been developed by DPIRD in collaboration with GRDC, Marcroft Grains Pathology, New South Wales DPI, SARDI, University of Melbourne, and CSIRO. The next slide shows the DPIRD Sclerotinia field trials in WA have shown some interesting results. So we've been doing work in DPIRD since 2010 on Sclerotinia and canola, and you can see that we've done a large amount of trials. So Andrea Hills has prepared this slide from the projects that we have done this work in, that you can see down the bottom of the screen. This work's been done by myself, Andrea, Ravjit, and Bonnie. And the interesting thing is that of the 47 trials that we've done, there's been sclerotinia and a yield response in only 14 of them. So that's about a third of the trials. In the other 2/3, there's been sclerotinia but no yield response, or no sclerotinia and no yield response. So I just wanted to show you this because sclerotinia is a challenging disease to forecast, and this shows you that yield responses to fungicide are not guaranteed. Next, looking at the sclerotinia disease cycle, this gives you a good idea of why it is such a challenging disease to forecast. There are 3 trigger points required for sclerotinia infection to occur in canola, and the first one is germination of sclerotia to form apothecia. That requires cool, moist conditions in autumn and winter, and obviously the presence of sclerotia from a previous history of sclerotinia. The next thing required is that the petals need to be infected, so this requires crop flowering to coincide with the presence of apothecia for infection to occur, and it has to be moist, humid weather at that time as well. The third thing that's also required is infection of the crop, the petals falling into, the infected petals falling into the crop canopy. It needs to be cool, moist, humid weather. Then, and you can see that all of these 3 steps require specific weather conditions to be successful. So sclerotinia development is closely related to seasonal rainfall, and the disease is most common in areas that have average to above average rainfall seasons, and where sclerotinia inoculum is present. So you can have the presence of apothecia, you can even have petal testing where the infection is confirmed in the petals, but if you don't have the weather conditions during petal drop that suit the disease, then you won't get infection. So you have a very challenging disease here. Looking at what's happened in WA so far this year, we've had all 3 stages of the disease cycle occur, but just in different areas. So apothecia are being seen in the DPIRD sclerot depots that we have. So as part of the modelling project in diseases, we have sclerot depots from Geraldton all the way to Albany and Esperance. And in early June, they were germinating in Albany, and early July in Esperance, and last week they started germinating in Geraldton and Northam. So that gives us an idea that the disease cycle started there. And petal infection has been observed at Kendanup, Beverley and Reagan's Ford, which is sites that we have trials at, so we were doing some testing there. However, the actual stem rot symptoms have only been observed so far at Reagan's Ford, Dale and York. So these are some photos kindly supplied by David Cameron from Reagan's Ford, and these crops are generally got an earlier start than a lot of others in other areas of the state, and they've been doing quite well rainfall-wise this season. We really appreciate any reports to PestFacts. It gives us a great idea of what's going on to share it with the rest of the industry. So the question we want to ask today is, How do you know whether to spray for Sclerotinia or not to spray? So the best management practice is to apply foliar fungicide during crop flowering, but before symptoms are seen, or at least before they get very severe. However, I've shown you that it's a challenging disease to forecast. There are so many trigger points and variables involved, and they're specific to each paddock. So yield responses vary a lot and they're not guaranteed. Also, we need to treat fungicides as precious resources. So instead of putting a fungicide on every year by rote, we really need to stop and check, is it actually necessary? Because we don't want to be contributing to fungicide resistance issues. So all these questions lead into, this is where the SclerotiniaCM App comes in. So the SclerotiniaCM App was released last year. It shows an easy and useful tool for iPads and Android tablets. It's great for helping you to make decisions on whether to apply fungicide or Sclerotinia management in a given paddock and season. During crop flowering, you input the variables specific to your paddock to help determine the likely profitability of applying a fungicide spray in this particular season. So the app gives you a best case, worst case, and a most likely outcome of financial return. So you can download the app on your iPad or Android tablet from the App Store and Google Play. And we've tested the app in the 2018-2019 season through trials that DPIRD have been doing, and we're doing trials again this year. And so far the app is showing, it gave an accurate estimate of the value of applying a single fungicide in those seasons. So we really appreciate any feedback from you all, and if you get a chance to have sprayed and unsprayed in a paddock and compare it to what the app output is, we would love to hear from you. So how does the model actually estimate potential disease impact? So I thought I'd show you the trigger points and how the model relates to these. So to determine the early risk of apothecia germination in your paddock, the model will ask you for your paddock history. So it will ask you the soil texture, how often you grow broadleaf crops, and have you had Sclerotinia yield loss in your locality, and how often that happened. And disease development is very dependent on presence of moisture and humidity, as I've shown you. So this mostly asks you what is happening during crop flowering and in the 2 to 3 weeks after spraying, because these are the crucial times. So the app will ask you, what's the current bloom stage? How many wet days have you had in the last 3 weeks? The expected wet canopy days next week and the week after, and what you expect to be the management conducted by the fungicide, so the mitigation by the fungicide, how effective you think it will be. So then the app will calculate the potential yield loss to Sclerotinia stem infection, and it will give you the expected yield in terms of with fungicide spray and without spray. Then it uses the expected yield that you've got in conjunction with these other inputs that you put in, so the yield expectation and your expected grain price, plus disease mitigation by fungicide spray, and then it takes away what you're saying, what you've imported as the fungicide spray cost, and then it will give you the net return from fungicide spray. It will give you the minimum, the maximum, and the mean, what it thinks the most likely outcome will be. So it's a really useful tool, and particularly in seasons like this, we encourage everybody to give it a go, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So we've had a few questions, and I wanted to answer them from my experience using this with growers. What is a wet canopy day is a common question. So I wanted to show you that one of the things in the app that's really useful to know is that there's a light bulb icon in the top right-hand corner. If you click on the light bulb icon, then it brings up these little eye icons which are next to all the variables, and you click on the eye and it will play a little video to explain to you what that variable is. So for wet canopy days, you can click on this icon, and I'll just play you the audio of it now so you can hear what is a wet canopy day.
Use the expected wet canopy days next week control to set the number of days from 0 to 7 in the coming week that are forecast to be wet enough in the canola canopy to promote Sclerotinia infection. Research by New South Wales Department of Primary Industries indicates that sustained periods of more than 48 hours with humidity in the crop canopy above 95% are wet enough to promote infection. The canopy must be wet enough that there is free water on flowers and leaf axils, but rainfall is not necessarily required. Note that conditions are more likely to be wet in dense canopies or locations sheltered from wind.
So that's a great explanation, and there's been a lot of research done into this. So wet canopy days will vary obviously by different varieties and different canopy types, and that's why I wanted to show you a quick picture here of dense bulky crops here that have good canopy cover. They'll have more wet canopy days. So here is a picture of my jeans after walking through this crop, and this is what we call a wet canopy day. So it is a judgment call, and there's no substitute for experience. So walking through the crop in different conditions and seeing if your pants get wet is a good example of how to determine a wet canopy day. The wet canopy days vary between different crop types and different varieties. So this crop here on the left, I wanted to show you a comparison. This one has small leaves. The crop's not very dense. You can see the ground through the canopy. So this kind of crop is going to dry out easily. Wind will get into it and there won't be much moisture or humidity there. Whereas the crop on the right has larger leaves, may have been more densely sown. It could be a hybrid variety with increased early vigor and it closes its canopy early. So this kind of crop retains moisture and humidity, and this kind of crop is going to have more wet canopy days, and that's how you report to the app that it's going to be at higher risk of Sclerotinia. So if you have access to humidity loggers, that's what we use in our trials. You can put some loggers underneath your canopy to help train yourself in what constitutes a wet canopy day. Otherwise, you can use the genes test. So another question we have had this season particularly is about the large range of growth stages in a paddock. How do you know when to spray? So if you look at this crop, I've taken a photo of, you can see that ranges from not flowering yet all the way up to 40% bloom in a very small area. So many crops this year are patchy with very staggered growth stages within the same paddock, and it's hard to know when is 20 to 30% bloom the best time to spray when there's so many different stages happening. So the message is to go with the growth stage that's most common, as you want to protect the plants where the majority of your income is coming from. I wanted to remind you that you need to apply fungicide before the end of 50% bloom. So do not apply fungicides beyond 50% bloom stage. And this is important because it's what it says on the label, and there are reasons for it to do with residues in the grain, and we need to follow the instructions on the label. So this is an example of what 50% bloom looks like. So it's full bloom when the crop appears in its most intense yellow colour and pods are only just starting to develop. So if you have a crop that has varied growth stages in it, you need to have a look at the overall paddock, and if there are areas of the paddock beyond 50%, then you need to avoid spraying fungicide in that area. I will now hand over to Dr. Art Diggle. He's the crop modeller who coordinated development of the app. He'll be taking us through a couple of paddock scenarios with us to demonstrate how the app works. Thank you, Art.
Oh, hi. And I'd like to point out that a lot of talented scientists and some clever programmers have had input into this. I wouldn't like you to suppose that I just magicked it up out of nowhere. What I've shown you here is the summary page of the SclerotiniaCM app, and that's the page that most of you spend most of your time looking at, and that's great. It shows expected yield with spray and without spray, and loss to Sclerotinia with spray and without spray, and the expected net return, and particularly down in the bottom right-hand corner, the expected difference in net return between spraying and not spraying. So in this particular example, you just barely get the money back that the spray costs on average, might be a bit more or less than that. in all of the views on the left-hand side are a lot of controls. That's where you tell the app what your situation is. There is, hidden under the hamburger icon on the upper left, quite a few other views, different ways that you can look at the information. I'd like to encourage you to give these a try, and I'm going to use some of these others in what I've got to say at this point. This is what the app had to say in late July for one of Ciara's trials near Geraldton at 20% bloom. And at that stage, it wasn't looking terribly wet. The app, in the yield view, the closed purple distribution shows that the app was expecting about 1.3 tons per hectare if you don't spray, with range around that, because our yield expectation is never perfect at this time of year. If you do spray, the app reckons that'd get you an extra 100 kilos of yield. Then if you look at the net return view, it shows the same information in more detail as what was on the summary page. And this is the same settings as I just showed. The average is pretty much 0, maybe less, maybe more. But when Ciara went out a couple of weeks later at 50% bloom, it had been raining, and the expectation for getting trousers wet was quite a lot higher at that point than it had been 2 weeks earlier. The app is now saying there'll be it's predicting quite substantial losses to Sclerotinia and quite a big benefit from spraying. So on the net return view, it's mostly purple, quite a lot of chance of making money. And out here on the right-hand end shows the worst case scenario for not spraying. You know, it might possibly be over $150 or over $100 in it. This sort of suggests a strategy which would likely pay off this year. If you have a look with the app at the beginning of bloom, if it's a line ball decision, you can always wait until later in the flowering period and try again rather than committing yourself to spraying at that point. On the other hand, if it's a big crop and the conditions early indicate a benefit from spray, the app may tell you when you check later that it's worthwhile spraying again. That doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does. Now, there are quite a number of reasons why you might use the app. Do I or don't I spray? Have a look at the difference between spraying early or spraying late. You can use it to compare different fungicide products, which you would describe in the app in terms of how much they cost and what their mitigation is likely to be. It allows you to play with priorities in different sorts of paddocks, depending on the sorts of inputs that Ciara mentioned: soil type, canopy cover, your yield potential, your Sclerotinia history. Maybe it will suggest a second spray in some circumstances. It does give you a good list of all of the factors that you should be considering in your spray decision. And if you don't spray when the app reckons it's not going to pay off in a major way, then you will be minimizing use of fungicides and minimizing risk of losing fungicides to resistance. Another view that is hidden away at the bottom is the About view, which gives you lots of information about the app, including all of the credits. But if you look hidden away at the bottom of the About view is an email address. If you're using the app and you've got a query or a comment or any sort of suggestion, and you click on that link in the About page, it'll take you straight to your email, and you can send us a little bit of helpful advice. And we have had in this last season few days ago, in fact, got a very handy bit of commentary from an agronomist in Naranda, New South Wales, pointing out something about the app that we otherwise never would have known. If I would encourage you to do that, please, we'd love to hear from you. So all of these mobs that Ciara's already mentioned need to be acknowledged. And both Ciara and myself are happy to be contacted. These are our contact details.
And thanks everyone for coming this morning. If you have any questions or you want some further in-depth workshops or anything on the Sclerotinia app or just Sclerotinia in general, please contact Art or Ciara and we'll see what we can organise. Thanks everyone. Bye.